Hey, Mere Mortal listeners, and welcome to another Mere Mortals interview. Now, I say interview, but I'm tricking you. This was actually more of a conversation. I recently had a chat with John Plumley. Now, John is the host of the Plumley podcast, formerly known as the JP Bar podcast, and is situated in Calgary, Alberta. In this interview, in this conversation, we focus mostly on the self-help genre. I was introduced to John via Instagram, and I found that I was really digging some of the connections he was making with his own podcast themes and some of the people he was speaking with. And one of these in particular, he spoke about the book Limitless by Jim Kwik, which is in the self-help genre. So we first start off the conversation speaking about the book, speaking about the self-help genre as a broad scale, and figuring out, I guess, some of the positives as well as negatives that can come from this industry. I've had a personal connection with that when I was a little bit younger, and I've sort of grown to be a little bit more cynical, but not jaded of the whole industry. So we had a really good conversation about that before then getting into speaking about truth, reality, lies, and I suppose models and mentors. So role models nowadays are a little bit different because I think it's a lot rarer to have someone directly face-to-face, that face-to-face interaction. And it's more you're getting snippets from people from podcasts or books or interviews or wherever it is that you consume media. So we had a bit of a speak about that, as well as some of, I guess, just trying to clarify what is a role model and how do you view them in today's day and age. I really enjoyed this conversation and highly recommend that you check out John's podcast, the Plumley podcast. So I'll leave it at there for now. I hope you enjoy as much as I did. John, thank you so much for appearing on the Mere Mortals podcast.
Yeah, I'm very excited for this, man.
Yeah, me too.
Your guys' podcast is one of my favorites in the realm of smaller podcasts. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
There's a lot of small podcasts out there, and I just don't find myself that interested in them. I'm always just like, okay, I'm going to turn to like the greats, the Joe Rogan, the Tim Ferriss, the Lex Friedman. And it's hard for me to find the time to listen to smaller podcasters. But with Mere Mortals, you guys are one of the top small podcasts that I listen to. So I'm really excited to be here with you today.
Yeah, thanks, man. That's a huge accomplishment, achievement, praise. Yeah. And we don't take it lightly, man. And yeah, speaking of, that's sort of how I found you. You messaged us a couple of times across different platforms. And so that's, a good way to get connected, and then through Instagram as well. So yeah, I was, I don't know what drew me in. It could have been your wide collection of shirts that has potentially got me. You've got some fantastic, the yellow one, for example.
Yeah, that one's kind of become my staple almost. And someone was commenting on it for me. And they said the colors they like the colors. And I was like, okay. And I'm thinking about, branding for my podcast and colors and things of that nature. So I thought I'll take that shirt in Photoshop and then just color match the colors from that shirt.
Yeah.
And so I pulled like the same color, yellow, orange, and then a navy blue from that. And those are kind of going to be my podcast brand colors now, thanks to that shirt. So kind of bringing that real life clothing kind of style into the matrix, and now it's the digital colors. So
it's doing wonders.
Yeah,
perfect. So I listened to a couple of your podcasts as well, and you started fairly recently. I think it was in April. Is that right?
Yeah, no, June 4th, right on my birthday. I released my first episode after thinking about it for a long time. Right, I remember writing in my journal, I think last summer, that I was planning to start a podcast on January of this year. Didn't really happen, but then when COVID happened, I just started doing way more content in general, like YouTube videos, just Instagram stuff, social media. And so then it just worked out that June 4th, was like the right time for me to do the podcast. And it's just going to be cool now. Every birthday going forward, I'll be able to kind of return to that and just kind of see where my podcast has gone, or just any content in general, kind of year after year, and kind of check in on that on my birthday. So kind of excited about that for sure.
Yeah, nice. So I listened to a couple of episodes, and I guess what drew me in is we have very similar styles or interests. So you'd go on social media and marketing with one of your interviews, and then the next one would be about the cold therapy and exposure and breathing. And yeah, very similar. I'm doing the same things now, so it's like, oh, cool. Yeah. All right, I want to dive into this a bit. And what really I wanted to talk about today was your solo episode. I think it was number 4, where you talked about the book Limitless by Jim Kwik and some of the things in that. So that got it right in front of you. Excellent. Yeah. So I wanted to get, if you could just actually give us a quick rundown of the book, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure. Well, first of all, the concept behind it is something that I'm seeing as a very common theme in general, which is people like Jim Kwik who are writing and publishing a book well after doing a podcast and getting sort of fame and growing an audience online, right? And that's happening so much. You see Jay Shetty, who's just published a book, and then just many others. Tim Ferriss, who published a book based on his podcast, got a lot of the bulk of that book from the podcast. So that's kind of a interesting thing that we're seeing a lot of now. I think of Jordan Peterson as well, Jocko Willink. All these guys are able to like make these books and become bestsellers. A lot of that's from their audience that they've already amassed online. And in this book as well is sort of similar to those like Tim Ferriss, Tools of Titans, in that this isn't like directly from his podcast, but you can tell so much of it throughout the book is like things that he's learned from interviewing guests or picked up from other books and things like that. So it's really a combination of lots of different people's thinking put into this book and distilled into this book. So I thought that was really cool in general. It's very like modern and up to date. Whereas, I don't know, some sort of like books in this genre, like self-help, personal development, they can get kind of old or stale real quick. You know what I mean? So this book being like so fresh, it felt very, and it kind of intertwined with Instagram or with social media in general, like quite easily, right? Like it was often referring to go to his website for something to go along with the book, or challenging you to post a picture, and then like the hashtag is throughout the book as well. So it is really interesting how it intertwines with our whole digital world. And I think if you're writing a book these days, if you're publishing a book, it has to be that way, right? Like it sort of has to intertwine if it's going to be successful.
Yeah, for sure.
So I guess that's kind of the back end of the book. But the book itself is like, first it explains Jim Kwik's story, which when he was young had a brain injury. And then from there on out in school was referred to as the boy with the broken brain. And that became his image of himself and his belief. And so the title Limitless is, I guess, just to help people break down those barriers of, beliefs that you have of yourself where you're limited. The boy with the broken brain, his teachers were referring to him as that really limited him, right? Until he started later on, I believe it was like in his college age, he started to discover like speed reading or how to even just read effectively in general. And then once he started understanding how to learn better, he started to tap into these more limitless, ways of being, right? And then his old belief systems, his old, titles and different things that held him back started to go away, and then sort of untapping into Limitless, which is like, publish a book, do great podcasts, do great YouTube videos. Like for him, he's really tapped into that. And I guess that's a brief sort of summary of the book in a sense. It's
Yeah, no, that's perfect, man. It's sort of that's a good summary for me, because I actually haven't read it, and the reason for that is I've read a fair few self-help books along the line. I can see behind you you've got the Power of Habit by Duhigg, and have you read Napoleon Hill's Think and Grow Rich as well?
No, I have it up there, but I've never read it. Yeah.
Okay, that's pretty classic as well.
Someday.
Yeah. So with the self-help genre, it's really interesting because they're different, but they're also the same in a sense. Like they're trying to get you to motivate yourself to do something. And I actually just want to start with like a little definition of self-help, which I was researching before this. So it's basically achieve things without relying on others. So it's an internal motivation, a drive, a source, whatever it is to do it. So hence the self and help. And this comes through so many different ways: infomercials, books, seminars, life coaches, weight loss, stress management programs. Like the list goes on and on. And I've personally found them very useful for a portion of my life. And then now I'm sort of going away from them, and I'm seeing some of the negatives as well. Just before we dive into the whole thing, did you find anything really attention grabbing from Limitless? Anything that you potentially hadn't heard from any of these other books?
Yeah, well, it's interesting because it definitely is. I'm trying to think of a clever. It's a reoccurring theme, right? And it touches on many themes. And again, it draws from different self-help books, different podcast interviews that he's done. So a lot of it is sort of regurgitating those similar schools of thought and teachings in a lot of self-help books. But what I liked about it is, like I said, it is, it's a brand new book, 2020. So it felt more fresh and more modern. And it's a funny thing, right? Like if you're writing yourself in general, you can always improve the writing, right? So you could publish a book one year and then the next year revise it and see a million different ways that you could improve on it. And in some sense, the self-help genre is sort of like that, but just with many different authors, right? And it's like each kind of new release, each book is sort of trying to explain very similar concepts, but just in a new and fresh way, in a way that's maybe more effective and more efficient. But in terms of this book specifically, I guess, well, I'll give an example of the Pomodoro effect. Have you heard of that or method, the Pomodoro method?
I've heard of it, but can't remember what it means off the top of my head.
Yeah, it's the method. The idea is to, when you're doing work, whether it be studying or say video editing or something like that, every 20 minutes, take a 5-minute break. Right? It's something that I just kind of discovered intuitively. It's like, okay, you're sitting there for 20 minutes, your attention span will decrease if you try to just pump out 3 hours of work and not have a 5-minute break anywhere. So I kind of just instinctively knew to do that, right? But then reading this book, it taught me the actual name for it and then just solidified it in my head even more clearly, right? So now it's like I have a name to that thing. So I remind myself, do the Pomodoro effect. Every 25 minutes, take a 5-minute break. And so it did teach me something. It taught me something that I already know, if that makes sense, right? Yeah. And that's kind of the theme of self-help, is it'll teach you something that you already know. And I think there's value in that, right? If you're a cynic, you might say that if you already know it, why do you need to learn it? It's a waste of time. You already know it, right? But you can definitely have like a more positive look at that and just consider that it's just reinforcing the same belief. Another example from the book is he gives a list of top 10 brain foods, right? And then explaining how, like, next time you're at the grocery store, just buy one of these if it seems too intimidating to like change your whole diet and buy them all. And I read the list. It was like avocados, blueberry, broccoli, fish, like salmon, dark chocolate, a few others, turmeric. And I read all 10 of them. And then I referenced my week prior to that. And I was like, I actually consume every single one of these. The only one I didn't was like walnuts, but that's something that I've had many other times in my diet. So it's not like reading that is like, oh my God, top 10 brain foods. I haven't tried any of these. It's all new. It was like, no, I actually have ate all 10 of these at some point in the last week. So what that told me was, again, it taught me something that I already knew, but it reinforced that, right? So now when I went to the grocery store the next week, I was more focused on making sure I bought those foods, right? So it's reinforcing these belief systems. And in that regard, it's, I guess, open to interpretation whether or not that's valuable to relearn sort of the same things, right?
Yeah. You touched on a good point, which is basically every thought, everything that has ever been thought has already been done, and it's more of a rehashing and putting it in a different way. Yeah. Jordan Peterson, for example, would
Right.
He was constantly referencing Niche and Young and all these different people. They've already said the stuff, but he put it in a totally different way that just absolutely like captured, well, the Western world's attention for, the 2 years where he was sort of flying really high, and that's generating controversy and whatnot. But I guess the rehashing and the relearning of stuff is definitely a good aspect from it. You can find things and reinforce things which you might not have been knowing was beneficial. So if you're doing like a daily journal or something and you're thinking, oh, what benefit am I actually getting from this? It can be that reinforcement to say like, hey, keep doing this. And there's plenty other pros from self-help as well. The motivation aspect is obviously a huge one. Getting people to feel good about themselves and I guess instilling that energy to then go do something.
Yeah.
Other of those would be the introspection, accountability, and I guess even hope. So I actually met this guy very recently at the calisthenics park where I was working out, and I could tell just from speaking with him for sort of like 20 minutes that he'd had probably a very rough childhood, and he was sort of like physically wise, just not a little bit gangly, not in the best shape, physical appearance, and especially in the face as well. Not anything you'd say like, wow, this guy's a 10 out of 10. He's just one of those, I guess, like ugly, if you have to put a name to it. But he was telling me about, I guess, his childhood a little bit, and you could tell like, yes, he'd been bullied as a child. He was very very shy, quiet, and almost to the point of not being able to talk with anyone, let alone he was telling me how he'd changed his life around through a lot of these motivational people. So I don't think he mentioned Jim Kwik, but Zig Ziglar, Tony Robbins, Mark something. He rattled off like a bunch of names in very short succession. Yeah. And so for him, I could say, definitely the motivational, the self-help genre has helped him tremendously, because from where he was as a kid, you can see, yes, he didn't have those helpful things being told to him and being reinforced. And I was just wondering, how, out of all the books you've read, out of all the self-help, I guess, how big of an impact would you say that it's actually had on your life in particular?
That's an interesting question. I would say a big impact, but to say that it's made like the biggest impact, it's negligible, right? It's about even, I would say I've gotten more impact from podcasts. You know what I'm saying? Like Jordan Peterson, you mentioned him. Listening to his podcasts, again, probably when he was like at his peak, like about 2 years ago and even about a year ago, and still definitely coming back to them now, but really quite heavily about a year or two ago, was just so bloody mind expanding, right? And he's from the same province as me. That's where he was born, is just a little bit north, well, quite a bit, like maybe about 6 or 7 hours north of where I am now, but from Alberta.
That's nothing in Canada distances.
But so I just really resonated with him right away. And what really got me was his biblical lecture series, which I know I'm kind of going off topic. I guess in short, to answer that question first, self-help books definitely have given me a lot of value in life, but they haven't been like life-changing, right? I'm not like millionaire, super big businesses just because of the self-help books, but I'll always continue to have them in my life. And I'll get back to the Jordan Peterson story, but with this book, I did read it all the way through, only because it was, really prompted you to read the whole, like it does a really good job of like bringing you through the book and really encouraging you to finish through the whole book. Whereas most books, they're just kind of written, it's not like really reminding you, read the whole book, right? But this book really made you get along with it like that. But in terms of most self-help books, I'm not going to really be concerned if I don't read the whole thing. It's funny, you look at my bookshelf here and, most of those books, including Habit, which you pointed out, I still have the bookmarks in them at maybe about a third left.
Yeah.
And for some reason, that's just a theme I notice with self-help books is I never get through to the very end. And at first that kind of bugged me, but then I just accepted, and it's like, well, I'm getting value from it. I'm enjoying it. They're not books that I'm necessarily going to force myself to read the whole way through if I don't feel like I have to. And I'm still getting value from it. But again, they're not like the end all be all. But I think they're almost like I almost enjoy them as if I would like reading a novel like The Great Gatsby or something. A lot of people read novels before bed, or, Lord of the Rings or Harry Potter or something. I'll just read these self-help books before bed, and they're kind of more entertainment at this point. But again, they're just doing a good job of reinforcing and strengthening these sorts of similar themes in terms of self-help and personal development. So that's kind of my view of that in general. Anything you have to add to that?
Yeah. That's perfect, and a good explanation of even just your reading style, which is very different for me. I'm gradually learning to drop books if I'm not enjoying them after, say, like reading 10% of them. Whereas in the past, it was every book I read, I've got to finish. That's just sort of my mentality, like an innate personality trait that I have. So yeah, even just, I guess that aspect of taking the parts from it that you need. And potentially at the end, you might find, oh, okay, they're starting to tail off a little bit, which makes sense because they would be trying to pack in the really important stuff right up at the start.
It seems that way. There's also I have the mindset of saving something for later. Like I do have in the back of my mind, like one day I'll be able to sit down, like maybe 10 years from now, like maybe really far out, right? And I'll have all these books that still have a third left or a quarter left to read. And I'll be able to one day just like maybe sit down for a month and revisit all those. And I don't know, that's kind of a thought I have as well in regards to that.
Yeah. And then you read, the meaning of life in the last, if you'd read one more sentence, you would have got it.
Yeah.
Some of the cons as well. So I like exploring topics from two different aspects as well, and sort of playing around with things. I actually had a pretty fun conversation with my dad the other night where one of his friends that he plays golf with, once a week, twice a week, is a flat earther. Like he found out that he's a flat earther, pretty much normal in every other respect, but this one little thing, he's got a very warped viewpoint.
And this guy's like in his 50s?
Yeah, it was something around that. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And it was fun. So he just came up with like this hypothetical thing saying, oh yeah, for the podcast, you could do a video with him or something and, try and convince him out of it or something like that. And I took the viewpoint of like an actual flat earther. So I was trying to argue with my dad, essentially saying why the earth is flat. And so I do like exploring things from two different angles and sort of playing devil's advocate with a lot of stuff. So
yeah, for sure.
With the self-help industry, have you seen any potential like negatives or bad things that come out from it?
Yeah, definitely. And I guess I am pretty good at having a filter on to avoid getting into that. Like I can't really say that I've read any sort of self-help book and really felt like, scammed by it or like a total waste of time. I think I have a pretty good filter. Again, in my mind, like it has to be from an author. Typically will have to be, especially nowadays, from someone like Jim Kwik, who I'm already familiar with through the podcasts or YouTube or some form of content. So I trust them, right? I know that, okay, maybe they are talking about, similar things that I've already read about, but I like their style and I do think they have something unique to bring to the table. Jim Kwik, I definitely felt that way about him. And I was right. I would say this book is quite a standalone when you really compare it to other self-help books, but they're not all created equal, right? I would say this is in sort of the upper sort of tier of that sort of genre. But I mean, nothing really comes to mind in terms of well, obviously I can think of many different types of, shady folks that just have a really, not well put together book. And there's nothing unique in it. There's nothing new. There's nothing, different about it. And it's totally just clearly regurgitated stuff from maybe like Tony Robbins or some of the older sort of self-help people. And these people have just totally regurgitated it. I'm sure there's a lot of that, especially once you get into like maybe ebooks or things that aren't necessarily published. But for me, I'm lucky enough to have a good filter. I know how to separate the wheat from the chaff. Jordan Peterson phrase there.
Yeah.
But not everyone has that, I guess, right? Maybe if you're just getting into this sort of genre, you could easily fall sort of victim to someone who put together a sort of less optimal self-help book.
Yeah. You mentioned two things there that stood out for me. One was how you actually found Jim Kwik, and it sort of ties in with another thought I recently had with another guest who was essentially talking about how in today's day and age, you can't scam people in the same sense you could back in the 20s or the 50s, which is just, put something in a newspaper saying this miracle cure will blah, blah, blah. And you can't do that in that sense nowadays, because there's just that just gets brought to the surface so much more quickly. So with the podcast, for example, of Jim Kwik, you get to see, okay, this is what he's like as a person, and it's really hard to hide. I'd argue that anyone who's spent 100 hours in front of a camera, you're going to find out if they're full of shit from that. Someone's going to find it out, and that reputation will go. So I think one of the problems that could come out nowadays, especially more in the future, would be people who are genuine, who are serious and wanting to help, but haven't put in the forethought of, is this actually helping, and doing that investigation. Another thing that's popped onto my radar recently is voluntourism, which is, if you haven't heard of that, it's essentially people who go, usually Westerners, to a developing country for a month or 3 months to paint murals, build a house, teach children or whatnot. And yes, they're helping in one sense, but it's more of a ego thing, like, I'm going there and doing stuff. But if you look at the long-term sustainability, you're not actually doing much. You're creating dependency issues for the children because you build these connections and then you leave. You're taking jobs from the actual people in the countries who could have been building that house, who could have been painting that wall or whatever.
Right.
So that's something I sort of see coming up in the future, perhaps. The problems that could come from just inadvertently not spending the time to actually measure what you're doing and seeing, okay, is this actually helping people? Even though I feel like I'm doing stuff and I feel my heart's in the right place, is it actually working?
Yeah, that's always a tough thing to know. And I'll actually tie that into sort of a pushback on what you're saying about it's harder to sort of scam people these days compared to maybe the 20s or 30s or whatever, where you have that classic example of the snake oil salesman that would, maybe in the cowboy days go town to town with the wagon and just totally rip people off with miracle cures.
Yeah.
And I would say in some ways it's kind of gotten easier. Like you said, like, if you have, hundreds of YouTube videos and hours, it's pretty, you can tell if that person's genuine or not. But at the same time, not everyone has that sort of filter, right? And it is easier, the classic example of renting the Lamborghini, renting the big house, showing that you're rich and stuff like that, or showing that you're well off or successful to sell courses, right? And I would say I don't know if it comes back that quickly to bite them as we may think it would or should with the internet. I would say those sorts of people can honestly get away with it for far longer than we would expect to be possible with the internet. And even what you're saying about traveling to these different countries to do some work, maybe in a impoverished country, I mean, that is also a tool in the toolbox of a scammer sort of person putting on this persona, right? They can go and, here I am with in some African village, I'm building a school here. Look at me, I'm, buy my book kind of thing, right? Like I'm a genuine person. There's tons of opportunities for people to make that persona, and it will come back to bite them. But yeah, like I said, not as soon as we would expect to be the case with the internet,
Yeah, that's a good point. Maybe it needs to be something to do with the quality of what is being produced rather than quantity. So if you've got 100 10-minute long videos, maybe it's different than 10 100-minute long podcast sessions. Maybe it's something to do with the format as well, rather than that's a good point.
For sure.
Think about that. Well, I'll give you a couple of cons of I guess like the genre, the self-help genre that I've seen, because just being exposed to it for I guess I think the first time I read maybe one of these books was about 10 years ago, and I went on a binge period for like 3-4 years, and then I've gradually stepped out of it. It's been a while since I've read one that's really fits into it. And I came up with this analogy when I was thinking of it today, because I thought, okay, this is maybe a good way of pointing it. So I sort of imagine it almost as in, and this is me being the most cynical, like really trying to attack it, which would be, say you've got like a moldy wall in your house. One of the things with self-help is it sort of needs to be a constant motivational thing. You can't just read a book once and then you're done. It's almost needs to be a daily affirmation. And that's a lot of the tips and tricks they have in it are a daily thing. So you go and you look into the mirror and you say these 5 things. I'm the best, I'm the greatest, I'm powerful. And then you'll write stuff down, and then, midway through the day, you'll do this special trick. So for me, it sort of felt, you've got a moldy wall in your house and you've got some paint, and you sort of paint over it, and you look at it and you're like, wow, my wall is nice, clean, shiny. I'm improving my house. This is great. And you've got the guy selling you the paint standing right next to you, and he's like, yeah, excellent. You're doing so great. This paint's here. I'm selling it to you, but great job, whatnot. And then towards the end of the day, you sort of see like the paint starting to pay, like the mold sort of coming through the paint. And then the next day you have to do the same thing. So it's sort of, I guess, creating a dependency on the seller. And one of the things I very rarely hear in the genre is that typical thing that you want from a really good doctor. If you have a really good doctor, they'll say, all right, do this, and I don't want to see you again. I don't want to ever hear from you again, because that means I'm doing my job correct. But I find, me personally, I haven't found that much from whoever it is, and name whatever self-help genre person. It's very rarely saying, look, I'm trying to make this the best for you, and I want to make myself redundant. I don't want to be important in your life. I want to be forgotten. And I was just wondering, what are your thoughts on that, in the sense that perhaps it's more of an industry that's it's a service industry, so people need to continually come back to it for updating.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's so hard to say. I don't think anyone could have the answer to that question, right? It's like just reading in general, or working out in general, even going to a doctor, like you find a doctor who fixes your problem and then says, like you said, never want to see you again. Like, you're going to be self-sufficient now. But even with that, I mean, it's kind of always a constant renewal, just being human, isn't it?
Yeah.
Right. And it's a balance. I mean, even with this book, there's many references. Go to jimkwik.com, go to the website. And then obviously once you're in there, you can enroll in his courses and such. And it's not a heavy sell, but it's still a sell nonetheless. And I mean, I just don't know. Personally, again, I take a positive outlook on it. I think it just is a constant renewal that you need to do, just like updating your iPhone. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
And some people might take advantage of that, just like Apple kind of does, right? Like, they make their old phones obsolete, so you got to upgrade with the new one. I think that's just a part of life. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah. And I'm not disagreeing with that.
Yeah.
If you find a good doctor as well, and you have problems in the future, hell yeah, you want to go to that same person, because
you may want them in your life still, right? Get some positive, affirmations from the doctor. Maybe they're just a great person. You don't want to totally be self-dependent. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, exactly. And that's the thing with self-help. It's, sort of from that definition, it's meant to be an internal achievement that you're doing, but you'll see so many of these these things link you to groups. Join the Facebook group, come to this meeting, we'll go to the Tony Robbins, huge conference, which has God knows how many thousands of people. Yeah. So it is, a little bit, I guess, ironic that it's
a double-edged sword, right?
Yeah. Yeah. The other one that I noticed in myself particularly was it's good at creating good feelings in yourself, but not necessarily pushing you to action as well. And so that's what some of the affirmations as well, I find. I tried that for a period. I also developed almost a list of things to read in the morning that were motivating, like motivational quotes. If by Kipling, I think it is a great poem. And I would read that in the mornings and be like, yes, this fires me up. I'm feeling good. But it was almost like the reason I was using those was because I was in a job which I didn't particularly enjoy. And I had a bunch of stuff that I wasn't working on, which needed fixing. But once again, that sort of painting over the wall, the Band-Aid solution. And did you find, I guess, when you were reading the self-help, putting it into action, translating what you're reading and learning into actions that you're physically doing, that you're creating goals and whatnot?
Yeah, it's hard to, some of that, like when it's all mindset stuff, how do you gauge if you're really putting it into action kind of thing, right? Yeah. I mean, it's different if, let's say you read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, and it's like, how do you judge if you put that into action or not? Well, are you going more hard at the gym after? Are you working out more? Are you running? Then yes, you are taking action on that book. But with something like Limitless, I found taking action was like, recording the podcast episode that I did on it, or even right now discussing it. To me, this is like taking action on the book, so to speak, right? It's like learning the principles in the book in a extra way, which is articulating it, right? So putting it into action is kind of a tough thing to sort of gauge, right? But obviously it's more simple. Some books have a clear call to action, but with this book, it was more kind of mindset things. And with reading in general, I guess, yes, I am putting it into action because it definitely encourages to develop your reading habits more, to do more reading daily. And then things like the Pomodoro effect, like I mentioned, I think it's Pomodoro method. I should correct myself. So yes and no. I don't know. It's a tough question to answer, right? Like you always have some voice in the back of your head that you're not putting principles into action enough. You know what I mean? Even like you read Can't Hurt Me by David Goggins, you might do better at the gym more consistently after. But if you look through the book again, you're like, God, I'm still not doing enough kind of thing, right? Maybe that's where it comes into a double-edged sword again, right? Even if you are taking action, it might not feel like you're doing enough, which encourages you to go and read more, to find more. Like there's got to be another answer. Why aren't I doing enough kind of thing, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Almost in the sense because it develops that introspection. So looking within yourself, but you're going to find the flaws if you do that. You're not going to see that you're a perfect human being. It's almost, if happiness was the end goal in life, you'd either want to be the fully introspected Buddhist monk living completely in the present, or someone who's never, like a psychopath in a sort of sense, in that they've never really thought about anyone else or looked inside of themselves to see, almost like you're intentionally being dumb. So yeah, that was a good point. I think with the David Goggins as well, you'd know if you don't have burns on your hands from doing enough pull-ups, or if your Achilles are not broken, then you're not doing enough. So that was a great sort of dive into the self-help, and I find it useful.
I want to touch on Jordan Peterson again, just to kind of
let's get to that in the end, because that leads to something else I wanted to talk about. All right. Just with self-help, I was attacking it a bit there. I think for me, sort of in a summation, it's a great method or technique for, I guess, introspecting and looking at yourself and fixing problems, because we all have problems. We all need to fix them. And it's almost something for me, I think that's you can have a go at it, and take I guess like the beneficial parts of it and leave it. It's just like everything, right? If you read a book, you're going to find some stuff in it that you don't agree with, and that personally for you won't be useful. Mm-hmm. So just take out the good bits, use them, and just be aware of some of the traps which can come up, which are, band-aiding solutions and not actually taking actionable actions and doing them.
Yeah, or that cycle of next buy my course, next buy my next book, right? That cycle of always feeling like there's some more, like something being held back, something you still got to learn. You got to understand that it's going to be stuff you kind of already instinctively know or have heard about. And just remember that you're going to use this book, whatever book it may be, to reinforce those principles in your mind, right? Not necessarily to learn some breakthrough thing, although that may happen, right? You always got to have an open mind with these things, I guess.
Yeah, for sure. Mm-hmm. The other thing from that podcast that you did, the solo episode, was you went into the 4 types of genius, which I'd actually never heard before. So do you want to give us a quick definition of those, if you can still remember them?
I'll reference them from the book.
Yeah, you got it from the book.
I should showcase my memorization skills because that's what the book teaches. And I do remember them, but I'll just have it out here anyways. So yeah, there is 4, and this is kind of it's pretty hard to define genius, right? This is kind of like one way of doing it, breaking it down into 4 ways. And when you read them and hear them, they kind of all tie in together, but it is good for some context, right? So there's one is dynamo genius, which is people who express like creativity and are really like ideas people. And some references that the book, or some examples the book gives, is Shakespeare or Galileo, because he was like really visionary in terms of thinking about the night sky and analyzing the stars and stuff. And then there's Blaze genius. There was dynamo, then Blaze, which is like people interaction type genius. So like Tony Robbins, when he's in front of the crowd, right? That's a Blaze genius, the way he can engage the crowd. And then there's tempo genius, which is people with like big picture, long-term thinking, like Nelson Mandela, who was imprisoned, but could still see like deep into the future and stick with that long-term thinking. Doesn't mention it in this book, but I was thinking of Jeff Bezos in terms of a tempo genius. I was listening to Richard Koch, the 80-20 principle guy, on Tim Ferriss just the other day. And he was giving a cool story about Jeff Bezos and just that, that humble beginnings, right? And when he first sort of discovered this layout and blueprint for that sort of e-commerce store of an everything store, right? He was able to understand that big picture and then have the patience and the tempo genius, I guess, to day in, day out, be willing to work on like one step at a time, right? First, it's selling books effectively, then adding one thing at a time until it's gotten to be this global, Amazon, the biggest e-commerce store ever. So I think he's definitely an example of tempo genius in terms of long-term big picture thinking. And then the last one is steel genius, STEEL. Those who are brilliant at sweating the small stuff and doing something with the details that others missed or couldn't envision, which, Jeff Bezos could be considered a steel genius as well, because he was able to look at the small details and piece them all together and create something big. You can think of Steve Jobs when you think of these as well. And, even Steve Jobs, again, he was a Blaze genius as well, because he was able to really connect with people in person too. So that being said, it goes on to say that, you are going to notice a combination of 2 or more of those geniuses within yourself. It's not like you're just good at, at data or numbers, right? It's like you're probably a genius in that area, but also one of the other areas as well too. So just a way of breaking down genius into kind of 4 different categories, but you're going to constantly notice bits of those in you, maybe at different times, more than other times. So that's a little bit of that from the book. And I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah.
Hearing it.
It's funny. Initially hearing it, when you were speaking of it, I thought, this is absolute rubbish. I am not getting anything beneficial from this. Why is breaking down the word genius helpful? Because there's a reason we say it. I think the context for that was I didn't have those specific examples. So when you say, the genius of Elon Musk versus a Einstein, okay, yeah, you can sort of see the differences between the two. One's very, I guess, like driven in a very IQ sort of way, theoretical physics, the most detailed orientated thing. You don't really need that personality aspect to it. And then, say an Elon Musk or an Oprah, saying genius to Oprah probably is a good description, because she is just so magnetic, so vibrant, that she captures people in. Anyone who can make, Tom Cruise jumping down on a couch is something special is going on there. So I think, that was one of those times where initially I heard it and didn't have that sort of additional context behind it. And it was also thinking, okay, so he sort of laid this out. What was his point in talking about these different geniuses? Why was that in the book?
Yeah, the point was to, again, break out of any limiting beliefs you may have. So if you don't understand that genius could be broken down in different ways, and you just have that picture of Einstein, who's,
synonymous with genius,
science, that sort of stuff, and maybe you have no knowledge in that field at all, right? And then you could consider, well, I'm not a genius. Maybe even I'm dumb, right? So that was the point of including that in the book, was just to show people like there's different aspects to genius, and everyone has it within them. You got to find like the areas that are, I guess, more prevalent to you. And again, just having more of a limitless mindset going forward, knowing that there is some genius within you that you can notice, knowing that it's not all IQ based. It's not all science and mathematics based, right?
Yeah. And that's works in very well nicely with the book, which is talking about limits. And it's something we've all had. We've all looked at that one person right now at the peak of whatever they're doing, of their profession. That's the epitome of success, and saying, okay, I'm never going to get there. How the hell could I ever get there? So that's a great example of that.
Yeah, what I would also, some value in that, right?
Yeah. The other thing, though, I would sort of push back a bit is, of all of those people that he listed, what would the average IQ of all of them be? And I would probably argue that it's probably in the sort of like high 130s or something like that. Even though, yes, there's not the mathematical sort of genius behind it. If you're someone like Steve Jobs or Jeff Bezos, you're great at abstract thinking, looking at different, looking at different aspects and linking unknown ideas or connections and making them, which I think is sort of what IQ measures. It's because it's not so much memory. It's not 100% mathematics as well. So
IQ's I don't necessarily like that measurement very much. Like, it just seems very fixed, right? It's like, oh, this is your IQ, and then that's it.
Yeah.
Right. It's like, okay. Whereas just before, the few pages before that, he was mentioning neuroplasticity and just this ongoing research in the brain, discovering that the brain's always changing, right? It's not that like your brain develops till you're 25 and then that's it kind of thing. It's like, no, your brain's always changing. So to think that your like IQ is fixed, which means your level of genius is fixed or your level of intelligence is fixed, is very, very limiting. And that's just kind of the baseline that we all accept in society, is that sort of limitation, right? That those things are fixed. Like, we're not often, I don't know, just whenever IQ comes into the conversation, it just implies to me that that's a fixed thing, right?
Yeah.
I think we could do away without that measurement entirely. Now, something that this has me thinking about, are you familiar with Neuralink? Elon Musk?
Yes.
Yeah. I think about that quite a bit, as I should, I think, because I think that's one of the maybe the most important thing going on in the world right now in terms of shaping our future. Just like brain interface, getting deeper insights into the brain, right? Once people are getting those neural links put in their head, and we're able to like look at the neurons, understand the patterns. What is IQ going to mean at that point, right? They're going to actually be able to go into your brain and see, theoretically, I don't know exactly how all this stuff works, but I can imagine it just sees all your neurons firing, and it can like analyze it and compare it with other data that they've got. And then at that point, it's like this idea of how smart you are kind of goes out the window, because the data shows you how your brain's actually working. You know what I mean? That's a very interesting thing to think about.
Yeah. So how would the world change if everyone's IQ jumped by 300 points? So what's the difference between a 385 and a 425 IQ? What would it be then? Yeah, that's definitely going to have some very, very big impacts on how we see. A lot of things are going to change from that, and technology is always updating our morals as well. So we're gonna have to have some serious thoughts of, okay, at least the initial people, like, the first 100,000, 10,000, 100,000 who get it, they're probably all going to be Westerners. So what does that mean versus, people in developing countries? It's going to bring some interesting questions to the fore. For me on IQ, I think it's one of those ones which is necessary, but also unpleasant. So it's very good at determining a lot of factors in your life, such as, sort of success and, however you want to define success. But let's just say reaching positions of power, or in getting in people to influence, how influencing people in the ways that you sort of want them to or whatnot. But yes, agreed. It's not the be all and end all, because you mentioned as it can change, and it does as you get older, it does decline. So it's sort of one of those ones where I think it's almost like, say if we found that Asian people developed bowel cancer at a really significantly higher rate. Okay, we definitely need to take that into account and put in measures in place. But you don't want to define them as being like, oh yeah, that's the bowel cancer race. No, that's dumb. IQ should be along those same lines.
Yeah, I totally agree. And then again, like it may or may not be fixed as is, but even if it is fixed, then it isn't once Neuralink is developed too, right? So really, I guess just you can never have a fixed idea of anything in this world, right? That's just the reality of the world we live in. It could be fixed for a time, but everything is open to change, even things that are considered totally fixed and done deals, right?
Yeah. And that probably goes on to what is it that as humans we want to promote and I guess strive towards endeavor. And so IQ is definitely one of those ones where you can't influence it. You can get slightly better if you practice the tests, but even then it's like, a gradual couple of points. It's not, changing it from 85 to 150. So
until Neuralink
with the caveat.
Yeah.
So and that's another thing. So, we probably want to promote character and more.
Right.
So instead of, glorifying the beautiful people, you'd probably want to glorify their aspect of hard work that they put in, rather than, the fact that they are beautiful. True. Once again, taken into account, but it shouldn't. That's probably not the aspect that as a society, as a human race, we want to really say this is what matters. Because when it's those things that you can't change, beauty, IQ, your family life, genetic things like that, it's just so powerless. You become a victim to circumstance then.
Right. And then, happiness and empathy and, how much value are you giving to the world? That there's no measurements for that. And again, tying into Neuralink, if we are putting such emphasis on IQ still, and then people start getting more technology interfacing with their brain, getting more powers in that regard, then if we're not emphasizing and valuing more like happiness and providing value and having empathy and compassion and doing things in that regard, then we're going to be misusing that technology once we have it, right? It's just going to be like kind of that cartoon kind of superhero character of someone who just has this huge brain, right? And Neuralink, you keep getting more technology, you're smarter and smarter and smarter. But since you didn't go into that sort of experiment with a focus on, I want to be happier, I want to make other people happier, I don't just want to be a genius in terms of intelligence and science and mathematics, I want to use this technology to actually impact the world, right? So I think we as a society really need to be clear on that before we start really getting heavy into the technology and upgrading our brains in that sense.
Yeah. Just because it's making us smarter in one sense doesn't mean it's a universal good. You've got to have the underlying, I guess, motivation, the drivers behind that to fix that. It's just like the volunteerism, just because your heart's in the right place doesn't mean you're actually going to be doing good things. You could be hurting more than you're helping.
And I guess just like self-help, where you got to have that intention. I guess that's what it really comes down to, is what your intention is. And it should be on more than just increasing your IQ or increasing your intelligence in that regard, right? It should be also increasing your compassion, your empathy, your self-awareness, your love, your respect, your value to the world, all those different things too. It has to have that. You have to have that as your intention. That's kind of the fix for any potential bad things, or I don't know, lack of a better word, when it comes to self-help or anything that's supposedly supposed to improve your intelligence or expand your mind, you've got to have your intentions straight, right?
Yeah, 100%. Why I started off with the definition as well of self-help and then talking about genius was getting me thinking about those conversations I've had in my life where I've talked past someone, or you come away from it thinking, okay, I just had a half an hour conversation and I've gone backwards. Like nothing, if anything, I'm less clear of whatever we're talking about. I'm more confused. Have you had many of those in your life where it's, and has it, since starting the podcast, has that improved your ability to have better conversations?
Yeah, I definitely have had that, where, like you said, there's some saying for that, right? Like, I don't know, in terms of if you're doing all the talking, you're not really learning too much, right? Whereas you got to be listening, especially when it's of people that may know something that you don't know, which is how you got to approach all people, right?
Yeah.
But I actually had a really nice opportunity just naturally through family, friends, through my dad's best friend had this sort of situation, which sort of introduced me to kind of the mindset I want to have going into podcasts, which is sitting at a table. This is what the environment was like, sitting at a table in a garage multiple days a week, where it's all these different adults from many different walks of life, just kind of, shooting the shit, right? Just chatting, talking about different things, and being put into that environment frequently at a younger age, like high school age. I couldn't do all the talking even if I wanted to. And I did want to, right? I wanted to sit there and talk and share all the things. But whenever I would, and most often, I would be like, oh, like these people didn't really care about what I just said, or what I said was kind of like childish and down here. Meanwhile, what they're talking about is more up here.
Yeah.
So that like built that muscle for me to like just listen, because it was kind of forced upon me. And that was sort of lucky in that sense, but that was like my most real world, like podcasting experience at a younger age, being put in an environment, with like 60-year-olds, being, 16 years old. You don't have really the opportunity to talk over people or to take up all the airtime, right? You've got to develop that listening.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, I had that opportunity and it's built the muscle well.
Nice. And that's awesome to hear. That's something I've, tried to develop as well. I think naturally being introverted helped me a lot in that sense.
Right. Like me too. Yeah.
It's sort of, I used to view it as a negative, I'd definitely say, in my younger years, where I wasn't comfortable being in those rooms and I would naturally just not talk that much. To the point where I guess people would call me out on it in a sense, like, oh, Kyrin, you haven't said anything. So, but now it's I've sort of fixed it to the stage where I can talk, and if you get me rolling on something, I can just talk for hours. But it is much more fun, I guess, to find out what other people were mentioning. You basically you sort of repeated what Jordan Peterson said, which is finding something. Everyone has something that you don't know, and that could be the most important thing in your life to know. So you should probably try and find it out.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So getting just talking about Jordan Peterson. So
my man.
Yeah, he's he had a big impact on me as well. And it's looking back now, it's because I was going through I guess a period of just some changes in my life. I quit my work. Some of my family was having health issues and whatnot, and I think I was developing a point where I was also listening to a lot of podcasts, and I was getting exposed to every idea there is out there, and I was almost in a state of, information overload. There was too much. I couldn't really handle all these competing things. Like, okay, what actually is that matters? One of the things I really took from it was his emphasis on speaking the truth and not lying, which you mentioned as well in, I think it was your intro episode, where you were talking about reality bending and telling a lie is almost trying to bend reality to suit it to what you want. Is that something that you've really taken out from him? Do you still practice that to this day?
Yeah, definitely. And reinforcing that lately is I've been reading Gandhi's autobiography, which I forget the Indian word for this, but it's essentially like, just truth, right? And the book is, my experiments with truth. I don't know if that's the book title or just the sort of heading title for the chapters, but subtitle. But yeah, I mean, most certainly. And when I was in high school, again, like I was just very, very adept to lying, just came out in regards to my parents, lying to them, and maybe to like get more freedoms, to spend more time with my friends. And then on the flip side, lying to my friends to like maybe make it seem like I didn't spend much time with my parents. Just really strange mindset of a troubled youth, let's say, right? Yeah. And then listening to Jordan Peterson just put it so clearly how lies really work, because you always hear like, don't lie, tell the truth, but it's never explained very well. It's like, well, why not? Because then you're in high school and you're like, well, I can lie about this and these people will like me more. My parents won't know that I'm doing things they might not approve of. Like, it seems like now's a pretty good time to lie. You don't really understand the long-term ramifications of it. Whereas Jordan Peterson just put it so clearly, it just like light bulb moments. It's like, wow, I was hanging on every word when he's really going in depth about lying. And then the way he somewhat radically ties it to, Nazis or, the Soviet Union, and how I guess that comes up a bit more into the factor of like not speaking the truth or not speaking out against things, and watching other people do things that are clearly wrong and not having the confidence to say no and to put your foot down and to stop that. And so that combination, like lies and not, standing for what you believe in and speaking out against what's clearly evil, or at least from your view wrong, that combination, when done by like mass amounts of people, leads to, Nazism or death camps and just horrible things. And the way he like pieces those together, it really hits. And you're like, that's one of the biggest truths I've ever heard. And then when it's put into that context, you have this obligation. You're like, I understand now why I speak the truth, why I don't lie, why I speak out against people doing the wrong thing, even if it's the masses and I'm the person on the fringes, right? Now you understand that, and then it just kind of starts giving you chills and you feel connected to like this overall good of the world kind of thing. And that just has resonated so much with me.
Yeah, very similar experience here. I've had a couple of moments in my life where I listen to something and it just captures my attention completely. That's like the best way I've found of putting it. I'm so dialed into it that I stop whatever I'm doing, whether it's stretching, whether it's walking, or like if you're listening to something and you stop walking and are just hanging on the words, that's something you need to investigate more, because it's so important that it's stopping you from physically doing something. For me, the lying aspect was quite simple for me, because I've always just been a terrible liar. It's like just impractical for me to actually do it. Remembering the lie, controlling the facial emotions, it's it's always been terrible. So I've sort of had to become a better person, almost unwillingly, in the sense that I just couldn't get away with being a shit person.
Right.
So, but yeah, what he says though, and when he's talking about all those reasons that you just mentioned, talking about not speaking out, or telling the truth, or at the very least not actively lying, not doing something is wrong, just tremendous, man. And it's
right.
Yeah, I can't tell how many people's lives that I've talked to who he's had some effect on. And yes, it's biased, because I'm naturally drawn towards people who are similar to me, so they're going to find his message very, very resonating. Which
I don't know,
gets
that's an interesting one. Like, there is controversy with him, and like you said, maybe because I feel the same way, connected with many people where he's really resonated and has helped. There's really no one on the other side that can explain, well, what he says has hurt me. You know what I mean? It's just kind of like illogical kind of stuff. I'd say overall, like, his net good surpass, anything. There's really no net bad to what he speaks or what he teaches, unless you are thinking in the dichotomy of like self-help, like Jim Kwik, for example. I would say he has a net good, even though, you could analyze and say, oh, well, he's trying to sell a course, there's always nitpicking. But overall, I think that sort of stuff, there's no bad at all. And I hope that I'm not blind to that, but I just think that's the total truth,
Yeah. I think with him, it's, for whatever reason, whatever it was, people actively went out of their way to try and find something wrong with him. Because like you said, he's the most mellowed person out there. He's not actively... He's mellow, but also has that fire, that anger with him in him as well, which
his shadow
moments. Yeah. So it's he's a very interesting guy. I really hope he recovers from his
me too.
That he's been having, and would love to hear more. Just I guess, especially more the sort of philosophy from him, because that was what I really was like dialing into as well. The biblical series. Never been interested in the Bible stories and stuff, but going into that was like, whoa, very cool.
Same here, 100%. Yeah.
So just linking to this last thing I wanted to ask you about, which was, you've mentioned a tons of names both of us have in this podcast, and Jordan B. Peterson, Tim Ferriss, Joe Rogan, Lex Friedman, David Goggins. I also saw on your Facebook you were talking about Robert Greene, how you'd love to have him.
Yes, Laws of... I guess I took that book down. Laws of Human Nature.
Yeah.
I actually... I'll let you finish, but I'll just add this now. When listening to Jordan Peterson's podcast quite heavily, when I was first listening to it, I was also reading The Laws of Human Nature by Robert Greene. And that book plus Jordan's podcast, especially the biblical ones, where he really goes off into just psychology in general and philosophy in general in those in that biblical lecture series. But that went along so well with the book that I just felt like all my neurons were firing. Things were connecting in such a way. Peterson was mentioning Carl Jung and the concept of the shadow in the podcast while I was listening to eating breakfast. And then with my coffee going down to read The Laws of Human Nature, lo and behold, it's the chapter on the shadow and referencing Carl Jung. They just tied in together so well. It was absolutely amazing. It just felt like everything was jiving. Just unbelievable, man.
Nice. One of the things I've started doing is reading books in pairs. So if I'm reading a select genre, so I've actually just got in front of me Dracula, and I paired that reading with Gulliver's Travels. So two fictional works written from the 1800s, and you get to see the differences between them. Another really good pairing I found was Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky, and then Therese Rakin by Emile Zola. about a book I'd never heard of before, but two very similar stories, but attacking, a murder and the psychological guilt from that in two completely different ways was really, It was awesome to just contrast the two.
Yeah, that's always nice.
Yeah. So I guess what I was, this is just a thought I've been having recently, and I'm trying to figure out my own thoughts on it, which is, I've never really had a mentor per se, a physical mentor I go to it for advice, and they've, had a disproportional effect. Their advice, their learnings has had a disproportional effect on me. But what I'm finding is I'm taking learnings from all these different people in different areas. And one of the things both I and Juan are doing is creating a list of, like I mentioned, something that captures my attention so completely. Yeah. I'll listen to that podcast or book or whatever it is, and create a worksheet finding those particular things from it, what it was that really drew me in. So have you had a mentor, or are you more like me where you've had you're taking different parts from different areas of other people's lives?
Yeah, definitely like you. Like, mentor has become sort of a buzzword though, so I was kind of searching, like I had to have had a mentor somewhere in my life. So I was kind of like creating a mentor out of someone who doesn't consider themselves my mentor, but would if they really analyzed it. And that would be this family friend named Doug, whose garage was the place I was describing, where I would go to sit at the table and really learn to listen and not talk and just be exposed to different types of people. So he is my mentor in a sense, but I guess, and maybe that is the best sense of a mentor, because what he teaches me is not so explicit, right? He's not philosophical, and I guess he is to an extent. He doesn't necessarily read heavy intellectual books. He's not an entrepreneur. He's not, into business that much. So he doesn't sit down and clearly say, this is what you do, and this is how to, mentoring me on a business or what to read or anything like that. But he gives me such valuable life advice, and I just have to kind of take it out of him in a sense, right? Like that lesson in how to listen better and how to listen. And it's translated to me when I do my podcast. I sort of channel that energy that I got and still get when I go to his garage and am exposed to different people there. So he is my mentor. But yeah, I don't have a Jordan Peterson type mentor, which I would love as well.
Yeah.
Right. But I do look at the books as, I don't know, actually, I would say Jordan Peterson is my mentor, right? There's certain people that they're in my mind as if they're a person that I've known in person. You know what I'm saying? In my mind, when I'm thinking of Jordan Peterson, I can hear him saying something really not that much different than I can hear Doug, who I know actually in person, right? It's very funny how the mind works that way, but that's kind of my abstract thinking on mentorship.
It's almost like we need a new word for that conglomeration of different ideas from different people and sort of finding the meta version of that. So, we listed 10 different names in this, and you wouldn't sign on to every thought of every one of these people. And one of the things I'm noticing is I probably wouldn't even genuinely, if I met them in person, might not even like them. So for me, one of the people I've, I guess, really, I would say is the closest thing to a mentor in a sense was George Orwell, whose books 1984 is my favorite book, and
I've heard you reference him lots.
Yeah, and I find that after reading about him, almost to the extent of, I think I read every single thing he's ever written, and assorted biographies of people about him and whatnot. And I don't think I'd actually like him as a person. As a person, I think he had a lot of qualities that would make me go, you know what, I wouldn't be a friend with him. But that being said,
probably.
Yeah, and that being said, that's one of the things you got to watch out for nowadays is divorcing the person, as a person from what they speak about as well. And how would you find that? So if you found out that, say, Jordan Peterson had committed a terrible crime or done something, shady with sleeping with his students or whatnot, how would that influence your views of him and what you've taken out from him as well?
Yeah, I think personally with that case, I would separate, it's undeniable the lessons I get from his books and his teaching. So I wouldn't let, if that came out, like if there's some really deep and horrible scandals, I wouldn't be like, okay, everything I learned from him is garbage, and then just like go on and be okay with lying and all that sort of stuff. I wouldn't like lose that knowledge, right? I guess I would just have to accept it and be like, okay, makes sense. It's a good thing that I didn't know him deeply in person. Otherwise, I would probably be hurt. I would still be hurt, but it'd be easier to divorce that reality from the lessons I've got from him. But yeah.
Yeah, it's very difficult.
I'm pretty biased towards him.
Yeah. I totally get that just disproportionate effect where you'll have this one person will be, so important to you, and then especially nowadays where everything's recorded, so you're going to find something. You're going to find the time exactly. I used to like a homophobic slur or something, or times change as well. So what was acceptable now in 20 years time, you look back and go, oh yeah, that's probably wouldn't fly in today's
I'm sure it'll happen to you and I far into the future. Doing these podcasts now, like what about 20 years from now, people dig this episode up and find something kind of controversial perhaps, right?
I have no doubt. And it's I guess like, how do you address that in the moment? So there's also like ethical issues nowadays, which we all probably look at and go, yeah, we're not doing good things, but it's also, you just don't have the option of doing anything else. If you like meat and believe that meat is, useful for you in a daily life for health and whatnot, you're going to have to kill an animal of some sort. Yeah. And 30 years, 40 years, when we can grow meat, everyone will look back now and say, that's the equivalent of slavery. That's the equivalent of, killing people in wars and whatnot. So, so when you get down to it, we're all screwed.
Yeah. I actually don't know how else you could put it, honestly, without being totally nihilistic about it, but that's just the facts, right?
Yeah. Reality is not the prettiest of things, and you sort of, I guess, like to win at life, you just have to make the best of it.
True that. Yeah.
Awesome, man. Awesome. Well, John, thanks so much for coming on, man. I love this discussion. This hour and a half went by so quick.
I'm starting to understand how these people like Joe Rogan, Jordan Peterson can go for that 3-hour mark, especially in person. It's even more chemistry with that. It's like, I get it now. I understand it. It's hard to keep them to 20 minutes if that's what you're thinking would do better for your audience. It's like, good luck with that.
Yeah. Juan and I did like an hour and 20 last night on just goal setting, and we could have gone longer. But it was like, no, okay, we got to stop. We got to stop. So John, thanks so much again. If people want to connect with you, what's the best way of doing that? Where would you direct them to?
I would direct them to Instagram. I really enjoy Instagram as a platform. So my name on there is Jack Plumley, Plumley. And then also I'm rebranding my podcast.
I noticed that.
Yeah. So I originally called it the JP Bar podcast, which is like a family logo for my grandpa, which is JP Bar. And so I'm still going to use that logo. It's, kind of my logo I've inherited, but I'm going to change the name to the Plumley podcast. So going forward, if you just YouTube the Plumley podcast, Plumley, you'll be able to find me on there. And I really like utilizing Instagram to connect, reach out with people. It's a really great platform for that.
Yeah. Second in here, that's where we Juan and I spend the most of our time. You also have some clips on YouTube as well, so that's a good place.
Continue to post my podcast on there as well. So
awesome. Cool. Thanks so much, man. We'll have to do this again. I found some I like the fact that you're pushing back on some of the things I say as well, which is always handy to have. It's so easy to get stuck in your own mentality and your own way of thinking. So Very much appreciate that.
Yeah, I appreciate you as well, and would love to have you on my show in the future as well, and
awesome.
Juan as well. Maybe
let's
individually, but
yeah. Awesome, man. Okay, thank you so much, and we'll leave it there.